This video is brought to you by my Dazai t-shirt and my Dazai body pillow that is sitting behind me here, watching me record this video. Good morning, evening, night, whatever time it is. Good, yeah, so, hi. My name is Husky, and today we're going to be talking about one-tricks in Pokémon UNITE. You may have heard the term thrown around quite a lot, and you may have some preconceptions about what that means, how it exists in the game, and whether or not it is problematic. So we're going to do a deep dive on that with some discussion, and most importantly, math! We're going to do math in this video! But the first thing we need to do is we need to establish exactly what a one-trick is so we can actually do a study on it. So a one-trick is short for a one-trick pony, which is defined as someone or something that is good at doing only one thing. And this is commonly used disapprovingly. So the first thing I did was I looked at Google Scholar because I'm a researcher for a living, and this is literally the first thing I do whenever I want to learn about literally anything. And unsurprisingly, I didn't find any peer-reviewed studies or anything like that. So that means I had to do my own. From surfing the old Google, I found a few different definitions, whether articles, Reddit, gaming forums, and it led me to realize that there are generally different conceptualizations of what one-tricking is. My conclusion then is this: there are multiple types of one-tricks, which I will present to you right now. So the first type is a true one-trick, and that is defined as someone who only plays one Pokemon. They'll never switch off their one-trick, they will still play it regardless. Now this definition comes from players on online forums. For example, this League of Legends player said, "I define an OTP, one-trick pony, as someone who will play one champion under any circumstances, regardless of other factors. In my mind, the only reason a true OTP will play a different champion is if it gets banned or they get autofilled in a role where the champion isn't playable." In another example from the Overwatch space, one player said, "A one-trick is a player who will only play one hero and never play other roles." This is the capitalization that they're using, by the way. "One-tricks will never switch to other heroes even if the situation needs them. A one-trick will never switch even if they're being hard countered due to their knowledge of knowing only how to play one specific hero and not the others." So I couldn't find enough evidence to back this up, but I'm going to say that a true one-trick has over 75% of their total number of games on one single Pokemon. This seems reasonable, at least to me, to define a one-trick, because Unite gives you so many free licenses. It's reasonable to assume that any player would have tried out those free licenses once or twice or a little bit here or there, and then ultimately end up back at their one-trick. So I think that 75% metric is pretty reasonable there. Now, a semi-one-trick is defined as someone who may play a variety of Pokemon, but they always gravitate back toward what they feel most comfortable with. This is more like a main. Like, you're the main. Generally, it's something that you play a lot and that you enjoy. So this comes from one player in an Overwatch forum who said, "Despite having quite a bit of time on a number of heroes, I've been told I'm a Mercy one-trick simply because I have twice as much time on her than my second most played character." I think that this point made by this player was an important thing that I needed to capture and defined what maining a character is pretty well. So the math here is that a semi one-trick will have twice as many games on their most played Pokemon as their second most played Pokemon. So for example, say your most played Pokemon is Pikachu, and you've played a lot of games on Pikachu. You've played 1,000 games on Pikachu. Now, you have played 7,000 games of Pokemon UNITE total. So, those 1,000 games of Pikachu are less than 15% of your total number of games. So you're definitely not a true one-trick. But your second most played Pokemon is Blissey, and say you have 475 games on Blissey. Well, you've played less than half the amount of games on Blissey as you have on Pikachu, which would make you a Pikachu semi-one-trick. The third type of one-trick is a role one-trick, and this is defined as someone who only plays one role. So this may be common. This is like a common thing among competitive players, because in the competitive scene, they'll usually slot you into a specific role to play. So you are the supporter for XYZ team, so you one-trick support, basically. It's a little more difficult to define this one in terms of math or anything like that, since this isn't an idea that I could find exists, I guess, in terms of discussions of one-tricks. But I'm going to say that a roll one-trick in Pokemon Unite will have at least 6 of their top 8 most played Pokemon as Pokemon from one specific role. So, to understand these definitions a little bit better, let's take a look at some API examples. So let's take a look at this player, who I played a game with the other day. Now this player has 7,066 total battles, 2,252 of which are on Blissey. Now that's only 32% of their total games, so that's definitely not a true one-trick. However, their number of Blissey games just barely doubles their number of Azumarill games, who's their second most played Pokemon. So this barely makes them a semi-one-trick, or maybe a cusp semi-one-trick, if you will. The rest of the Pokemon on their roster cover a variety of roles, so this wouldn't make them a roll one-trick either. Just a cuspy semi-one-trick. Now let's take a look at the second example. Another player who had the absolute pleasure of getting matched with the other day. They have 5,634 battles, 5,361 of which are on Zeraora. That is 95% of their total games on Zeraora. Basically, this player is the definition of a true one-trick. And one more example, this player is very clearly a roll one-trick, as there's only one Pokemon in their most played list that isn't an attacker. You'll also notice that they're an Espeon semi-one-trick, as their number of Espeon battles more than doubles their number of Pikachu battles. So I hope those examples helped you to understand where I'm coming from with all of that, and now we can get to talking about our pros and cons. First, let's dive into the pros of what one-tricking is. So, Pro 1, you learn one character really, really well. This can be a good thing, because you get a good idea of how one character or role plays in this game, and you can use your knowledge of a single character to craft your understanding of the game. Your micro skills, or the button pressing skills, are honed to the max on this character. You really know how to press your buttons on a specific character. Pro number 2. If you know how one character plays, you will also know how they don't play. Since you played so many games on one character, you've realized what decisions lead your character to getting kills or helping the team get kills, and ultimately what decisions lead to wins. So you can position properly, basically, and make reasonable decisions that help your team win. Pro number 3 is you understand your own playstyle. You've been able to narrow down what you enjoy into a very specialized thing and become so good at it that it feels incorrect to do anything else. And if nothing else, that's pretty cool. Now let's look at some cons. So con number 1, sometimes the game requires you to play other characters, and one-tricks just refuse to do that. Now that we have draft, we're seeing that the playstyles of characters and players can change depending on the composition, since we can see what the enemy team is choosing. But one-tricks won't do that. They will pick their Zeraora, even if it's completely countered by the enemy team. Con number 2. Some one-tricks have no macro ability. Macro is the ability outside of the button pushing, and it's where you understand the game from a broader perspective and have game knowledge. So this includes knowing how items work, knowing what other characters do, managing your resources, and all that other stuff. So sometimes one-trick players are so specialized to one specific character or role that they have no idea how to do the macro stuff. And yes, I'm talking to you specifically. You, Charizard players, who use your Unite at 2 minutes 30 seconds without fail every single game. I think that for the most part, these cons are why people have a negative perception of one-tricks, because to many players, it's so easy just to do our best to understand the game and make generally good decisions, but we often queue in with a Golden Badge Greninja who does 40k damage, and we're just like, why are you the way that you are? It's important to mention that these pros and cons are all completely subjective based on pure perception. Some one-tricks are people who are very good at the game and exceptional on their character or role of choice. I think it's just that people see a one-trick playing the same damn thing over and over and over, and we're like, how are you still having fun doing the exact same thing? Why can't you just pick something else? Why are we last picking Lane Decidueye? I was reading a Reddit thread specific to Pokemon Unite, and I saw a few sides of it representing a few different opinions. So I have some quotes from Reddit to go over. This one from user Yumi says, if I got last pick in draft and Dodrio was available, I just pick the bird regardless if we need a defender or support. I have a way higher chance of winning with my one-trick carry mon than to swap off and play support to support my probably dumb teammates with a 45 to 50% win rate. So this self-proclaimed one-trick player believes that their skill on their one-trick is more likely to lead their team to a victory than selecting something that is generally viewed as a better choice for the team. As the player themselves, they are more likely to be correct on this perception based on personal win rate, or their performance in games, or their success in the games, things like that. They probably are not as correct about the probably dumb teammates comment, but generally. The complete opposite side of this are people who are seriously frustrated with one-tricks. So, for example, one user called Diego G2004 says, problem is that most one-tricks are kids spamming their favorite starter or not-so-kids using the most broken mon to hide their lack of skill. For either type, remove their ability to use their one-trick and they will throw, simply because they don't have knowledge on any other character. So they are making the inference that one-tricks are either children choosing a starter Pokemon or adults choosing something broken. They also infer that one-trick players are not skilled, have limited game knowledge, and will choose to throw if their character is banned or selected by someone else. This quote comes from a place of frustration, and overall they're not likely to be correct about any of these inferences. They don't have any statistics to back it up. We would need to look at the ages of players, we would need to be able to define skill, we would need some statistics on reasons why players choose to throw games, so overall this statement doesn't really mean much besides this person is angry. In a similar vein, another user called Barca says, in most games they don't really bother me, but in this game I honestly do think one-tricks makes the game worse since they pick their main regardless of team comp or what lane they're choosing, which is a huge red flag and screams they're a bad player. And usually, yeah, they are. This comment is a little more reasonable because at least this person is stating an objective fact that one-trick players will choose their character regardless of team comp. However, they also infer that usually one-tricks are bad players. So again, we would need some statistics on that, as well as a definition of what a bad player actually is. Finally, this quote comes from sort of the middle of the pack. They make reasonable claims and not drastic assumptions. So their name is Elijah Lacour. I do always prefer a player that understands their mon and can play them well rather than a player who's not really a good flex player trying to fulfill a role they just aren't cut out for. Despite that, I will admit I do get pretty frustrated when I see players running double speedster or triple attacker team comps that just don't work most of the time, but despite that refuse to choose another Pokemon even if it could support the team well. So this person brings up that they prefer an experienced player rather than a player who's brand new to a character. They also say that they do get frustrated when people select a one-trick even if the team comp is bad for it. This person is coming at this from a personal perspective rather than making statements that can't be backed up, and honestly they're saying things I generally agree with. One-tricks can be frustrating to encounter, but I think overall I would rather a one-trick than someone who is brand new to a character and has no idea how to use it bringing into my ranked games. Now is my favorite part. So after doing the scripting and such for this video, I have a few hypotheses that we're going to answer. Hypothesis number 1. True one-tricks are not the problem we tend to think they are. They're not seen as frequently and are fairly rare. Hypothesis number 2. Roll one-tricks are far more likely and don't come with problems people tend to associate with one-trick. Hypothesis number 3. Semi-one-tricks are the most likely to encounter, but they do play other things and also don't come with the problems people tend to associate with one-tricks. To actually investigate my hypotheses, I'm going to be using the old reliable UNITE API to look at people's profiles and try to capture answers to the following questions. On average, what percentage of UNITE players fall into one of these 3 one-trick categories? And, on average, how good are these players? Now for the second part, that second question that I'm trying to answer about how good these players are, I will need an assessment metric. So I will be using win rate. Now hold on! It's because I don't really have any other reasonable way to assess skill just by looking at people's profiles on UNITE API. So for the sake of this video, I'll say that a good player has a total win rate above 55%, an average player has a total win rate between 50 and 55%, and a bad player has a win rate below 50%. Don't attack me for making these arbitrary win rate numbers. to define skill with, I'll make another video about win rate later, you can attack me there. So what I decided to do for data collection is I decided to look at my past 100 players that I have matched up with in my games and count up the metrics of players I have experienced. Now, I am an average player. My win rate's about 53%, so you would expect that I'm getting matched with some other average players, maybe some better, maybe some worse, so it's a pretty reasonable place to start, I think. Now, I couldn't just use 100. I felt like just using my personal games would not really adequately capture what's going on in Pokemon Unite, so I decided to take another sample of 102 players from Chris Heroes, who would be considered a good player because his win rate is very high and also represents a different region than me, so we can get, you know, a look at different regions and different levels of skill and who we're being matched with and how this relates to one tricks. And no other reason. No other reason for picking Chris Heroes. Nothing. So what I did was I recorded the win rate, whether they were a one trick, and if they were, what type. I also recorded what Pokemon or role they one trick. And let me just say, after going through 102 of the players that Chris Heroes has recently matched with, Chris, if you're watching this, I am so sorry. And I completely understand why you hate your job. What I found was the following. Across 202 players, 76 out of the 202 were classified as one of the three types of one tricks. That is 38%. 54 players were semi-one tricks, 32 of which had attackers as their most played, by the way. 24 players were roll one tricks, 22 of which were attacker mains. 6 players were true one tricks, all with different Pokemon, by the way. And also 8 of these players were both roll and semi-one tricks. I also looked at the skill level of the players, skill in quotes, once again, as shown by this histogram, which shows that most players sit between that 50 to 55% range, indicating that a good chunk of the players I sampled can be considered average. And when I go through my hypotheses, I'll also present charts similar to this one. Now let's look back at our first hypothesis here. The first one was true one tricks are not the problem we tend to think they are. They are not seen as frequently and are fairly rare. Well, a good amount of people seem to have mains, but generally true one tricks are not super prominent, so I was kind of right on this one. In fact, most players seem to pick a variety of Pokemon, and just to add on to this, 5 out of the 6 one tricks were average or good players. Only one of them had below a 50% win rate, which also matches the theme of the overall sample win rates. So I can't really say that these types of one tricks are any worse or better than an average player. Now let's look at our second hypothesis, which was roll one tricks are far more likely and don't come with the problems people tend to associate with one tricks. Well, this one I was a little bit wrong on. They're not much more likely, but when roll one tricks do exist, they are most often attackers. And again, these players' win rates also match the trend of the overall sample, just like with true one tricks, so these players aren't really any better or worse than the average player either. Again, we just see a few below 50%, and most are existing between that 50 to 55%. Now for our third hypothesis, semi-one tricks are the most likely to encounter, but they do play other things, and also don't come with the problems people tend to associate with one tricks. I was right on this one. This is the most common form of one trick, where again, most players main attackers. Looks to me like everyone plays attackers, so why, Timmy, do you keep releasing all-round? Just as a little fun fact, the most common semi-one trick Pokemon was Greninja, with 6 out of the 54 that fell into this category. And honestly, I'm not surprised. Additionally, the win rate trends follow the same themes as with the other two hypotheses and the entire sample. Just a few below 50%, most being average players, and a few above 55%. So again, we can't really say that one tricks in this category either are bad or different from any average player. Basically, I can't conclude anything definitively regardless because that would require a lot more in-depth data analysis, and quite frankly, I'm not getting paid for this. So I don't feel like it. If anyone is interested in giving me a bunch of money, I'll do whatever data analysis you want. But from this small sample size, it doesn't seem like one-tricks with no skill are running as rampant as we may think they are. That doesn't mean it isn't frustrating when we get that one-trick zeroer with a 47% win rate who backcaps during raid, never shows up to the fight, but it does mean that maybe it's not that deep. Even though I quite literally just made it that deep. Anyway, thank you for hanging out with me today. And I recorded this video once before already with no sound attached to it, so let's hope this one has sound, and as always, let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!